Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We have a great show for you today. We were talking about yesterday how it's been a little bit quiet to start the month. It is no longer quiet. We are going to talk about a big-time bombshell that could affect the future of college football that dropped yesterday. Then we're going to jump into who I actually think can win the national title. Kirby Smart had some comments on an ESPN Q&A that has ignited quite the debate around this topic. How many teams? Is there only 5, or is there more close to 12 teams that can actually pull it off? And then we'll get into another edition of the team slogans going into 2024. We did the top dogs, the clear-cut contenders in the first segment, so we've gotten to kind of the people right under that. The people still have a chance for a title, but are definitely in tier 2 as we go into the season. And then we have another Hot Take Thursday for you, and today we're talking about who I think is going to absolutely dominate this year. There are tons of very, very talented young guys in particular that I'm very much looking forward to, so stick around till the end to see that. But before we jump in here, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to see your questions or comments on the screen, have a kind of interactive experience here, is to use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, GSMCPodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to see your questions on the screen, we get to have a fun back and forth here, and maybe make the segment a little bit more interesting by hearing from someone other than me. But let's jump right in because we had a major bombshell drop yesterday. It looks like there is a group called College Sports Tomorrow that is starting to put together a proposal around a super league in college football. And if you've heard that term before, it's likely from the soccer super league that was being put together over in Europe that got a lot of pushback and didn't end up getting put together, but it included all of the incredible teams that everyone pretty much knows: Liverpool, Barcelona, Real Madrid, Chelsea, all of the incredible teams that have the most money. Let's put it that way. But they had this idea to possibly bring a version of that over to college football. Andrew Marchand and Stuart Mandel have been all over this, and it's a really interesting idea. I think that it comes from a lot of different perspectives, and you could have a ton of different takes on them, and I'm kind of a little bit in between, I'll be totally honest with you. But the overarching idea essentially is to have a single governing body over college football. It would get NIL in check, it would get the transfer portal in check, to where you have clear guidelines, clear rules, clear ways things go about. So that's a great thing, obviously, and that's something that we've been kind of yearning for in college football, but that is just the tip of the iceberg. Let's talk about kind of the football part of this and the actual on-field implications. So the current outline is about the top 70 programs in the country, so all the members of the 5 major conferences, so Oregon State and Washington State are included in this. You add Notre Dame and SMU, who is going into the ACC this upcoming year, will be permanent members of this Super League. Their status is unchanging. They are not in danger in any way. And then the rest of the 130 plus FBS schools, so I think it's about 133 if I'm not mistaken. So about split roughly around the middle. Obviously, it's about 70 to 63 of teams that are firmly in the field, and then teams that are fighting to get in the field. And this is where it gets a little bit interesting, because the perpetual members will be split into 7 10-team divisions. So there will be, depending how they break that up, I'm not exactly sure. I don't know if it's going to be a tiered system or evenly distributed. They didn't really go into too much detail because this is still a very new concept, but definitely very interesting. But there is a 8th division that will have 10 teams in it as well that can be promoted from the second tier. So these teams that are not permanently in, the ones that are not a part of the top 70 programs, will have to play their way into the league, essentially. And the confusion for me kind of lies of how many teams. Obviously they start with 10 teams in that 8th league, but how many teams get to stay? How do you decide if anyone gets to stay, or is it always just a rotating cast of 10 new teams every single year? I'm a little uncertain of that. It didn't go into too much detail on that part of it, but it looks like at the very least there's going to be 80 teams in this thing in total, and with a rotating cast of at least a handful of them at the bottom of this tiering system. So the 50 plus second division teams would have the opportunity to compete into the upper division, like we just talked about, into that eighth division that we just talked about. And it would create kind of a promotion structure. And I know there have been some people in college football that have been pushing for that. The European football leagues use that religiously, and it's been a great way for them to go about business. Obviously, a very different proposition over here, but at the end of the day, definitely a really interesting twist to the game that would be fun to watch at the very least. And then you have the 7 permanent teams that are in no danger of moving down. The second division teams would have the incentive of promotion and relegation to keep them moving, but the 70 permanent teams would just kind of be sitting pretty for the most part. So I think there's still a little bit of confusion around all of this. I think we will start to piece together more stuff as more information comes out on how all of this is going to work and the structure and, the real pushing factors behind this, the real promoter factors behind this. But as of right now, we know that the playoff is not going to require a selection committee. That is a big part of their pitch because the selection committee has been a hot topic of debate, especially over the last couple of years. So they will have 8 division winners, so the 8 teams that win their 10-team division, and then will have 8 wild cards. And that will be essentially from the top tier. They will use just the best record and tiebreakers like the NFL. So kind of an interesting situation. Obviously, I believe it'll be split up where it's 10 teams that are split up evenly. So essentially, this would do away with conferences alignments, and we'll get to that here in a second. But it's a crazy idea. Let's call it what it is. I mean, college football would be changed in essentially every single way possible. In so many ways, there would be certain things taken from us, like the regionality, like the conference championships, like the conference ties. But a lot of things would be given to us. Some, interesting relegation promotion situation, not having to deal with the playoff committee that makes us mad so often. So there are definitely some pros. There are definitely some cons. I'm kind of still working out my opinion on all this. It came out late yesterday, so have had a little time to process it. But I think the one biggest problem I have with this, or there are a couple that I have with this, and I'll start with just kind of the structure of the whole thing. I think 70 permanent teams is a little ridiculous to me. And now I fully understand you're trying to protect the big programs in the sport. Those are the ones that bring in money. You never want a situation where Notre Dame has a down year and falls down into the second division and you can't, you lose a big chunk of revenue that comes in from them. I totally understand that aspect of it, but college football is skewed. We know that. It's one of the more skewed sports in, the world of sports for the most part because of recruiting, because of the ability to just financially be in a better spot than other schools. But I think the people that are in charge of college football, their responsibility is to make it as even-keeled as possible, make it as fair footing as possible for these kids. And I think the biggest question is, what happens if Notre Dame does have a down year, or Texas has a down year, or Georgia, they go 3-9? Do they really deserve to be a part of those 70 permanent teams where they can kind of, take the year off, move on to the next year, and not have to worry about their status? I think the best way to do this would essentially be have everyone is up for promotion, and you make it a more tiered system, a more maybe a little bit more complex, but it might just be a little bit more interesting, and also it would keep some teams in it, and it would possibly bring up some teams that are currently on the outside looking in this second tier that consists of about 50 plus teams, to now everything is on the table for them, even long term, where if you start working your way up these ranks, you get more notoriety, you get more money, you get more ability to recruit the top athletes. So although I fully understand the impulse to protect the big dogs, to protect the teams that have been such a huge part of college football in the last couple of years and right now dominate college football, but I do think that if you're going to set up a future for college football that protects the, elite of the elite, you're setting it up in a way that is not necessarily in the best interest for the sport. Now, it might be in the best interest for these people, but I wouldn't necessarily say it benefits the sport as a whole, just because it takes a massive, massive group of teams just fully out of the conversation pretty much from the get-go. So that would be one of the biggest things I have with the structure of it. But the back end of this, the people behind it, I think, are very powerful people. There's no two ways about it. There are a number of people, one that is involved with the NFL that we'll get to here in a second, one that is involved in a lot of placement of conference commissioners around the country. So there are some people that really, really matter in the world of college football, and you wouldn't know their faces if you saw them, but they definitely do have a lot of power over the sport. And it's not that I don't trust these people or I think they are necessarily bad people by any means. I think they have, good intentions when coming at this, but it does, as the European Super League reeked of people just trying to make the most money and leaving the classic part of the sport out of it. This reeks of the same exact thing. And it's not necessarily that they couldn't pull it off to keep kind of some of the majesty, some of the tradition, some of the pageantry of the sport, but it's going to be really hard to. And the way that they've set it up now, the way I look at it is, this is a financial play. This is a kind of cash cow type thing, and I would be a little surprised if currently their biggest worry was what's best for the players, what's best for the sport. I think their worry is what's best for, our bank accounts. And, that's all well and good. That's the game that we're playing, I suppose. But I think when we talk about the sport, there's a massive disconnect of what people that are actually making the decisions think is wrong with the sport and what fans think is wrong with the sport. So we're kind of going in two different directions. But the biggest problem I have with this is I actually think it could work. I think there are a lot of people in the sport that are just searching for answers. And I talked about it when Nick Saban went in front of Capitol Hill and talked about NIL and everything, that we shouldn't, turn up our noses at people that try to give solutions. So I will absolutely hear this out and, look into more and more details about this and come to a final conclusion. But I think people in college football just want structure. I think coaches just want the ability to know what's going on, to have the rules in place, and if it comes at the expense of some of the tradition that the sport has, I think they would take that trade, to be totally honest with you, at this moment in time. Now, this is still a ways away. I'll be honest. There is some good news in all of this when I talk about, the possibility of this happening down the road. It seems like we still have some work to do to get there. It looks like the ACC met with this group. That is no surprise to me. I'll be totally honest with you. They are looking for a lifeline anywhere they can get it, if I'm being totally honest. But the Big Ten, the SEC, and the Big 12 all called off their meetings with this group. So I wouldn't say they're close. I guess I'll put it that way. And it's not necessarily that they couldn't be close very quickly, because it seems like from the Big Ten, SEC, and Big 12, they're mainly worried about upsetting ESPN, upsetting Fox, their current TV partners, by doing something totally different from what they're doing now and kind of throwing a wrench into all that, because then you got to set up totally new media deals. So if this really wants to continue, the people that they have to get on board are the people that make decisions in this sport, which is Fox and ESPN. So I think there's going to be a ton of push around that from this group recently. I think it's going to be really, really interesting to see how all this develops, because there will be people that are very powerful in the sport that want this to happen. I have no doubt in my mind, because to be totally honest, it would be a remarkable cash cow. They would make just insane amounts of money broadcasting this sport and putting out all of the content from this sport, because it would make for a lot of really good matchups. It would keep your team safe, so you would know you're tuning in every single year. With NIL being more regulated, I think kids would continue to stay in college longer, and you would have players that you gain real bond with and actually, care about, instead of, seeing guys walk in one day and walk out the other. So there are some good parts to this. There's no two ways about it. I think people will definitely hear this out, and this is definitely not the last time that we will hear about the Super League in college football, but it is quite a ways away. I will put that in there, because as of right now, 3 of the conferences that they absolutely need on board are not on board. And if they can get ESPN and Fox on board, then things happen very, very quickly. I promise you that. But I think for the time being, at least, this is more of an idea that has 2% of the traction that it needs to get to where it's going. So it'll be really interesting to see all this develop. I think, to be totally honest, when I look at something like a Super League, or something like the proposal that is put forth by College Sports Tomorrow, I don't see college football. I see, a version of an amalgamation of different sports. And here's the thing about college football: it's different, and it should be. For whatever reason, the people that are fully in charge of the sport don't understand that the fans of the sport like that it's different. We like that it's specific and regional, and we have conference foes and all of that great stuff. And it's being taken away from us through conference realignment, through NIL and the transfer portal and all of this different stuff. But if this were to happen, we're no longer playing college football. We're playing a professional form of football that just happens to bear the name of a college. So, I love to sit here and say and rejoice that we have someone that's stepping up to the plate and giving us an answer. And I'm more than happy to hear them out and see how this kind of goes. But as of right this second, this is definitely something I've had a nightmare about. I'll be totally honest. So not very excited about this idea. I don't necessarily think it's very close to happening, so I wouldn't necessarily stress yourself out too much, but something to keep on the mind for sure. College football is changing very quickly, and people are taking advantage of the state that it's in right now, where we have essentially no answers. But that was a relatively longer segment, so I will come to a break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about who can actually win the national title. Kirby Smart had some interesting comments about the 12-team playoff, and if it actually does increase the chances of these lower-level teams getting a title. So I'll break down who I actually think can win it, and my thoughts on that general statement right after this.